You've been speaking English for years, maybe even decades. You've studied grammar, you've watched movies, you've read books. And yet, right now, there are words you say every single day, words that feel completely normal to you, that native speakers hear differently. Not because you have an accent, not because your English is bad, but because these words have a secret, a history that nobody ever taught you. And once you understand what's really going on inside these words, you'll never forget them. I'm going to show you 5 English words you're almost certainly pronouncing wrong. And after each one, I'll tell you the real reason why, the actual historical story behind why the spelling and the sound have nothing to do with each other. Stay until word number 4, because that one surprises almost everyone, including people who have spoken English their entire lives. Let's start with word number 1, Wednesday. Take a moment and look at that word. Really look at it. Wednesday. If you're reading it carefully, logically, you might say Wednesday. 3 clear syllables, each part visible in the spelling. That makes complete sense. But that's not how native speakers say it. Native speakers say Wednesday, just 2 syllables. The middle part, the NES, is completely gone, swallowed, erased from the spoken word while staying perfectly visible in the written one. The first time most English learners hear this, they think they misheard. So they check. And yes, Wednesday, every time, in every English-speaking country. So why does the word look like it has 3 syllables if nobody says the middle one? To understand that, you have to go back about 1,000 years. Before modern English existed, before even Middle English, there was Old English, sometimes called Anglo-Saxon. It was spoken by Germanic tribes who settled in Britain. And in that language, the days of the week were named after gods. Wednesday was Wadensdag, the day of Woden. Woden was one of the most important gods in Norse and Germanic mythology. He was the god of wisdom, war, death, and poetry. The Romans had named their equivalent day after Mercury, their messenger god. When the Germanic tribes adapted the Roman calendar, they replaced Mercury with their own god. Woden's day, Wadensdag. Now, Old English was spoken out loud long before most people could read or write. Language evolved through speech, not through textbooks. Over generations, slowly, naturally, the way all spoken languages change. People began compressing the word. The middle syllable weakened. Then it disappeared entirely in everyday speech. But when English eventually became a written language, scholars wrote down what they saw in the old manuscripts. They preserved the old spelling. Wadensdag became Wednesday. The silent middle was locked in forever. So when you read Wednesday and try to say every letter, you're not making a mistake. You're being logical. You're doing exactly what any reasonable person would do with a written word. The problem is that English spelling was frozen in time while the spoken language kept moving forward. And nobody synchronized them. That gap between how English looks and how it sounds is the real story behind all 5 words today. Word number 2, colonel. Look at this word carefully.
Colonel.
How would you say it? Most learners say colonel.
Some say colonel. A few say colonel.
The correct pronunciation is kernel, like the kernel of popcorn. Read that again.
Kernel.
There is no or anywhere in kernel. Not a single one. And yet the word is pronounced as if it starts with kr. This is one of the most genuinely bizarre pronunciations in the entire English language. And the explanation for it is almost embarrassing. English borrowed this word from French. The French word was coronel, with an R in the middle. That word came from Italian colonnello, which meant little column, referring to the leader of a column of soldiers. When the word entered English in the 1500s, there were 2 competing versions floating around. Some writers used the Italian-influenced spelling, colonel. Others used the French-influenced spelling, coronel. Both versions were used in books, in official documents, in military records. For about 100 years, both versions existed side by side. People argued about which was correct. Printers used whichever they preferred. There was no standardization. Then something strange happened. The spelling colonel won, but the pronunciation coronel won. 2 different versions of the same word. One survived in writing, the other survived in speech. They fused together into a single word that has never made visual sense since. By the time anyone noticed the inconsistency, the word was already everywhere. In military ranks, in official titles, in hundreds of years of documents. Changing it would have meant rewriting history. So they didn't. Colonel stayed. Colonel stayed. And every English learner since has had to simply memorize that these two things belong to the same word. Again, not your fault. 500 years of linguistic accident. Word number 3. Receipt. RECIPT. Say it out loud. RECIT. The P is completely silent. You don't touch your lips together at all. There is no P sound anywhere in this word when it's spoken. So why is the P there? This is where the story gets a little uncomfortable. Because the P in receipt isn't there because of history or evolution or accident. It's there because someone put it there on purpose. As a decoration. In the 1500s and 1600s, there was a powerful intellectual movement across Europe called Renaissance humanism. Scholars were deeply in love with Latin and Greek, the languages of ancient Rome and Greece. They believed these were the superior, most sophisticated languages. And some of them decided that English would look more educated, more prestigious, more serious, if English words were spelled to look more like their Latin origins. The word receipt came from Old French, receipt. That came from Latin, recepta. In Latin, there was a P in the word. So these scholars looked at the English word receive and its related form receipt, and they said, the Latin has a P here. We should too. And they inserted it. The word was already being spoken without a P sound. Nobody suddenly started saying RECIPT after the scholars made their change. The pronunciation stayed the same. Only the spelling changed. The P was written but never spoken. This same thing happened to other words. Debt has a silent B because the Latin word was debitum. Doubt has a silent B because the Latin was dubitare. Subtle has a silent B because of subtilis. Island got a silent S inserted because someone incorrectly thought it was related to the Latin insula. It wasn't, but the S stayed anyway. In every one of these cases, a scholar made a decision, usually the wrong one, and the rest of the English-speaking world has been dealing with that decision ever since. You weren't taught any of this. You were handed a spelling list and told to memorize it. That's why these words feel random. They're not random. They're the result of choices, some good, most terrible, made by people who died 400 years ago. Now we need to pause for a moment, because we're about to reach word number 4. And I want you to pay close attention to this one. Word number 4 is the one that confuses native speakers. Not just learners. Not just intermediate students. People who have spoken English since childhood, who read English every day, who use this word regularly, they still hesitate when they have to say it out loud. The word is Worcestershire. You've seen it, probably on a brown bottle of sauce in a kitchen somewhere. Worcestershire sauce. And if you've ever tried to order it in a restaurant or ask for it at a store, there's a good chance you either avoided saying the full word or said something that made the native speaker near you wince slightly and then pretend they hadn't noticed. Let's look at it. Worcestershire. That is 14 letters. If you try to say every part Worcestershire, you get 4 syllables. Some people add even more. Worcestershire. 5 syllables. The real pronunciation is Worcestershire. 2 syllables. From 14 letters. Worcestershire. Worcester is a city in England. It has existed for over 1,000 years. And like many English place names, the way locals say it has almost nothing to do with how it's spelled. This is extremely common in British English. Places are named, centuries pass, local dialects compress the sounds, and what remains in everyday speech is a shortened, smoothed-down version that sounds nothing like the written form. Worcester becomes Worcester. Gloucester becomes Gloucester. Leicester becomes Leicester. Salisbury becomes Salisbury. The spelling preserves the old form. The pronunciation reflects 1,000 years of people just trying to say the word quickly. Shire, the second part, is a traditional English word for a county or administrative region. You might recognize it from Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, Shropshire. In careful speech, shire is 2 syllables, shire. In natural, relaxed English speech, it compresses to shire. So Worcestershire, the county named Worcester, becomes Worcestershire in everyday speech. That's it. That's the whole word. The reason even native speakers struggle with this is that most of them didn't learn the word from a person. They learned it from the label on the bottle. They read it, and reading it produces Worcestershire. The spoken form, Worcestershire, only makes sense if someone tells you, or if you grew up in England near Worcester. The lesson here is not just about one sauce. The lesson is that English place names, especially British ones, are almost never spelled the way they sound. If you're ever visiting England and you try to pronounce a place name by reading it, there is a real chance the locals will not understand where you're trying to go. This is not an exaggeration. Worcestershire. Say it 10 times. It will feel wrong for a while. Then one day it will feel natural. And when it does, you'll be ahead of most people who've spoken English their whole lives. Word number 5. And this one is different from the others. The word is pronounced. Specifically, the mistake is pronunciated, or pronunciate. These are not real words. They don't exist in standard English, but they sound like they should exist. And that's exactly why this mistake is so easy to make and so hard to notice. Here's how it happens. The noun form of this concept is pronunciation. 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 And the iation ending at the back of that word sounds like it belongs to a verb. Words like communicate become communication. Appreciate becomes appreciation. Negotiate becomes negotiation. So the brain follows a pattern. If the noun is pronunciation, then the verb must be pronunciate. And from there, how is this word pronunciated? What is the correct pronunciation? The logic is completely understandable. The pattern is real. The conclusion is wrong. The verb is pronounce. 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 The noun pronunciation is an irregular form that doesn't follow the pattern your brain expected. The O in pronounce becomes a U in pronunciation. The ending changes completely. So the correct forms are: how do you pronounce this word? What is the correct pronunciation? How is it pronounced? Never, how is it pronunciated? Never, what is the correct pronunciation? That's also a common spelling error. Writing it as pronunciation with an O instead of a U in the middle. This mistake is significant not because it's rude or embarrassing, but because it's a signal. When someone uses a non-standard form like pronunciated, native speakers instantly categorize them as a non-native speaker, even if everything else in their English is perfect. It's a small crack in an otherwise solid wall. And for people who are working toward a professional level of English, or who want their English to feel completely natural, it's worth fixing. The way to fix it is not to memorize a rule. Rules are forgettable. The way to fix it is to hear yourself say pronounce and then hear yourself say pronunciation and sit with the fact that they're irregular. Accept the irregularity. Don't try to make it logical. English didn't ask for your logic. Now let's come back to the bigger picture. 5 words. 5 completely different reasons why they're pronounced the way they are. Wednesday survived from a Norse god worshipped 1,000 years ago, when spoken language moved forward and written language stayed behind. Kernel exists in a form that nobody intended. The spelling from one language, the pronunciation from another, fused together after a century of inconsistency. Receipt carries a silent letter that was inserted by scholars who wanted English to look more like Latin, regardless of how anyone actually said the word. Worcestershire is a place name that was compressed by local speech over 1,000 years until only 2 syllables remained from 14 letters. And pronounced versus pronunciated is a trap set by a pattern that is real and logical everywhere in English except in this one word. Here is what connects all 5 of them. None of them were designed to be confusing. English wasn't built by a committee with a plan. It grew. It absorbed words from Latin, French, Norse, German, Greek, and dozens of other languages. Each borrowing brought different rules, different spellings, different sounds. Some were standardized. Many weren't. Spelling was frozen at different points in history for different words. Pronunciation kept evolving. What you're left with is a language that looks like one thing on paper and sounds like something else when spoken. And when you learned English, whether as a child or as an adult, nobody sat you down and explained the history. Nobody told you why. They gave you the word, they gave you the sound, and they moved on. That gap between the word on the page and the word in the mouth, is where most English learners struggle. Not because they're not smart enough, not because they haven't studied enough, but because the gap was never explained. Understanding why a word is pronounced a certain way is one of the fastest ways to remember it permanently. Your brain doesn't hold isolated facts very well, but your brain is exceptional at holding stories, at remembering cause and effect, at making sense of things that seem random once you understand the reason. Wednesday became Wednesday because a language evolved over 1,000 years. Kernel comes from a 100-year argument between two spellings that ended in a draw. Reset has a silent P because a scholar wanted to impress someone. Worcestershire is what happens when a place name gets compressed by 1,000 years of casual speech. And pronounced is irregular in a way that your brain resisted logically for good reason. These aren't mistakes you were making. These are gaps in what you were taught. If you want more of this, more words where the history explains the confusion, where the story makes the pronunciation stick, the next video does exactly that. 5 more words, 5 more reasons, same format. It's right here when you're ready.